So in this video I'm going to show you how to change the front derailleur cable on a bicycle. So this cable here is the one which I was describing. It's your front derailleur cable. So what it does is it connects to your front derailleur, which is this thing here, and by pulling on this cable it allows the shifter to move in and out, and therefore it allows you to shift between the different chain rings that you have on your front sprockets here. So on this bike the front derailleur cable travels upwards here, and then it enters this piece of cable housing and takes a 90-degree turn, and then it goes, it's the center cable here with all these other cables along the top frame of the bike, and then when it gets to the other end it comes off into another piece of cable housing which comes around here, and then it feeds into your shifter for your left hand, which controls your front derailleur. So it's these buttons here which control your shifting for your front derailleur. So there's basically three different reasons I could think of right now of why you would want to be performing this task, why you would want to be replacing this cable, or really why you would want to be replacing any of the cables on your bicycle. The first reason is corrosion. So although this cable here is enclosed for, you know, a few different parts along the length of it, like it has this piece of cable housing here which is, you know, protecting it from the elements, there is still this big section along here which is, you know, completely exposed, and it's exposed, you know, to the atmosphere, to precipitation, you know, really to whatever conditions you happen to be using your bike in. So you'll find that over time, if you're leaving it outside or something, or you're just riding it when it's wet and there's, you know, water that's forming on the outside of this cable here and just getting left there, you may start to see this cable that will start to turn brown and, you know, get rusty on the outside of it. And having this corrosion on here can be a fairly big problem because it creates additional friction for your cable to be pulled. So when you're pulling on your cable, when you're trying to shift, you know, it's harder for the cable to be able to be pulled through the cable housing because of this additional friction, and it'll be, you know, much harder to shift between gears on your bicycle. So if you're finding that your cable is starting to turn brown and it's being, you know, really a lot of friction to be able to change gears, the first thing I would just suggest trying is to add some lubrication to it. Just put some, you know, some chain lube or some oil or whatever you happen to use, like on your chain, just to, you know, put some all over the whole length of the cable to help reduce some of that friction. However, if that's unsuccessful, you might as well just go and buy a new cable. They're fairly inexpensive. I got this one for about $3. The second reason why you would want to replace one of the cables on your bike is if it became frayed along the way. So somehow, you know, something's come in contact with your cable here. Maybe it was when you had it in the car and there was something else on top of it, and it just caused, you know, these cables are like a whole bunch of little fibers which are wound together, and if it gets any sort of a nick in it or something, then you're going to have these little things unraveling, and then it's going to be a real mess. And it's, you know, if that unraveled part gets inside of one of these cable housings, then it's going to again cause quite a bit of friction. And well, really, if you have a frayed cable, you might as well just replace it, because, you know, it's just going to get worse over time. And well, of course, you know, every fiber that you lose here, you're losing strength in your cable, so there's more chance of it to snap, which brings me to my third of the three reasons of why you want to replace this, which is actually if your cable just happens to snap. And that third reason is usually caused by one of the first two reasons. If, you know, if it gets corroded and the corrosion gets so bad that it, you know, becomes a lot weaker, and then you happen to be shifting and you're pushing really hard on it because of all that friction, obviously, and then it'll just cause your cable to snap, and of course you need a new cable in that situation. And it's just the same with the frayed cable. You know, a frayed cable is going to be weaker and eventually will probably break. So on the note of frayed cables, this section right here where your cable connects to your derailleur is a place where it's really common for the cable to become frayed over time. The reason is because the way that this cable connects with this derailleur here is it's got this nut here which just basically just presses that cable and pinches the cable up against this section of the derailleur. And you'll find that over time your cable is going to gradually get stretched a little bit, so you're going to be having to come back here and making small adjustments of this, and, you know, moving the cable, you know, pulling the cable in a little bit. And you'll find that, you know, every time you pinch it again on the cable, you know, you're going to cause that cable is going to become a little bit weaker because it's going to move the fibers out of the way a little bit. So you may find that over time you need to actually replace this cable because it's broken off, like right at the end, and there's like basically nothing for you to grip onto to be able to pull this cable and tighten it on properly. But if you're not actually in that situation where this cable needs to be replaced on your bike, you may also find this video helpful because I'm going to cover, basically explain how a front derailleur works and how to set it. So if it's not set correctly, you'll be able to see how to make the adjustments to get it set correctly so that you'll be able to shift correctly with your front shifter. In my situation, I really don't have very much of a reason to be replacing this cable. You know, it is a little bit corroded, but nothing too serious. I would just be able to put some lubrication on it, but I'm really just doing this replacement for the purposes of this video. So the first step for replacing this cable is to remove the old one. So you can see that this bike here has one of these cable ends on it. That was put on at the factory to help the end from getting frayed and getting unraveled. So you could just cut that off, but I prefer to just pull them off. And the way that I do that is I use an adjustable wrench, and then I tighten it onto the cable like this, and then I just pull on it, and the cable end should just pop right off like so. And from that you can see why they put those on there, because already you can see that the cable is starting to unravel itself a little bit. So now you just remove this nut off here, and the cable should come off of the derailleur. So you could just use an adjustable wrench to do that, but instead I'm going to use my 9mm socket, which is a little bit more handy, and it will, prevent the nut from getting stripped at all. And just like that, it comes right off. And you can see right there that this part of the cable looks a little bit different than the rest of it because it has had that nut which has been pressing on it and kind of deforming it a little bit. So that cable should come off like that. And then moving up here, I should just be able to pull on that cable and it'll pull through the housing like so. And then it will go through this section of the housing, so you can just kind of feed it through there. And actually the cable housing will come off like that just by pushing it this way and pulling it up. And then you should be able to pull this piece of cable housing off and just put it somewhere safe. So this bike has one of these Shimano rapid fire shifter system, which has like a mechanism inside there, which when you press these two buttons, then what it does is it moves the cable the right amount of distance, so it will go to all of the three shift positions that this bike has. If your bike has one of these older styles of shifter system, they're quite a bit easier to work on. All you have to do is really, the cable just goes right in the end there. That's the end of the cable right there. So all you'd have to do is just pull that out and then thread the new one in. But since we're working on one of these more complex systems, what you first got to do is remove this top plastic cover. So there's two screws, Phillip head screws. So you just put your screwdriver in there and loosen those off like so. And then this thing should just lift right off like that. And then with this cover off, it looks fairly similar inside there as the other one looked. All you got to do is just push on the cable here, and there's the end there that's sticking out, and you just have to pull this through. And now your old cable is completely removed from the bike. So there's the old cable and the new cable, side by side. The ends are a little bit, they're slightly different size, but they should still work. The size of the ends on shifter cables are much different. They're even a different shape than the ones that go on a brake cable. The brake cable actually has a different diameter of cable as well. So I've got my brand new cable here, and before I'm going to put it on the bike, I'm going to put some lubricant on it. I'm going to lubricate the whole length of the cable, and that's going to reduce the amount of friction that it's going to have when you're shifting between gears, and that's also going to help to protect the cable from future corrosion. So the lubricant I'm going to use for that is just some regular, some bike lube. Basically the stuff that I use in my chain. I don't use anything really high-end on my chain. I just use this stuff that comes from the department store. It's like $4 or something for this bottle, and then this lasts me for for a few years. So the way I'm going to do it is just have a rag in one hand, and I'm just going to kind of hold it like this, and I'm just going to kind of dribble some in there, and then just kind of pull it through a little bit, and just basically get lots of oil on the chain or on the cable, so it's going to be nice and lubricated and nice and protected. So when your cable looks nice and shiny like this one does, then you're probably done. As long as it's nice and smooth when you rub your fingers along it, it should be nice and lubricated, and it should do a good job for you. But from here you have to be very careful you don't touch it against any of your clothing or anything, because it is very oily and a good chance it'll stain. Now another thing which is good to lubricate as well while you're doing this job is your cable housings. So as you saw when I disassembled that cable, there are 2 pieces of cable housing which go on that cable there. So basically what you have to do is you have to get lubricant on the inside of them. And the way that I do that is I just take my lubricant bottle and I just make a little bit of a drip inside the end there, or make a few little drips, and it should eventually just sort of soak its way down there a little bit. And after it's moved down a little bit, all you've got to do, or what I do at least, is I just put my lips on the end and just kind of blow it a little bit, and that just kind of helps get it moving down there. But just be careful you don't get any on your lips, and be careful the other end doesn't squirt out on you underneath. And then just to make sure lots gets in, you can do the same from the other end as well. And then I'll just do the same with this cable here. And that should be good. So now the first step for reassembly is to take the end of your cable, which doesn't have an end on it, and it just threads through the place where the old cable came off. And then it's going to go through one of these things. And that end should fit nicely inside of there. And then you're going to take the end of your cable and thread it through the cable housing like this. And it should just fit right in there like that. And then this piece of cable housing goes in between these other 2 cables. So it comes up through here. And then this piece of cable housing should just fit into the part of the frame on there like that. And then you thread the cable through your other piece of cable housing like this. And from what I remember, this cable gets routed over on this side down through here, and again the cable housing just fits into the part of the frame which is on there. And then the other end of the cable housing goes on here and goes into this part on the frame here, and the cable comes all the way down and connects onto there. Something that's important to note is that all models of bikes are a little bit different, and doing this job will be a little bit different depending on the bikes that you happen to be doing it on. For example, when doing this job on this bike is a little bit different because the cable has a different routing pattern. On the other one, as you saw, the front derailleur cable came out of here and then it went upwards and then it traveled along this top frame rail. However, this bike is much different. That derailleur cable actually comes down and it goes underneath here and travels with the other derailleur cable, and then they go up here and they come out there and then they go to your shift levers. So just make sure that you pay careful attention to where all of your cables are routed before you start removing any of them, so you'll be able to make sure you put them back to the way that they were when you found them. So before we actually connect this cable, there's one adjustment which is a good idea to make while we're in this, we have this opportunity. You'll notice that there's these 2 screws that are on your front derailleur somewhere. They're not necessarily going to be here, but there's usually 2 screws which are just kind of sitting side by side, and they don't have anything to do with, attaching the derailleur to your bike or anything. What they are is they're called limiter screws, and they're just for making small adjustments. And the idea of them, they're usually marked with an H and an L. So this one's the low, the L stands for low, the H stands for high, and what they do is they adjust how far in each direction your derailleur is able to travel. So you don't want your derailleur to be moving too close, too far inwards, too low, because what that's going to do is going to cause your derailleur to fall off of your smallest chain ring, and then your chain's off your bike, you have to stop and put it back on. It's a real pain. The high limiter screw is the same idea, except it prevents the derailleur from coming too far outwards or to the upper side, the high side, so your chain is not going to fall off of your highest chain ring and fall off in this direction. So just to demonstrate, when your derailleur is in this position where it has no cable connected to it, if you happen to adjust this low limiter screw, so I'm going to loosen it, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow the derailleur to go inward towards the frame, so you can watch it move as I do it. It's just moving in gradually. And now if I tighten it up, it will go in the other direction and it'll move outwards towards the larger chain rings. So while you're in this situation, when you don't have a cable connected to your derailleur, it's a good idea to make sure that your low limiter screw is in the right spot. So in other words, if I were just to pedal this bike with the chain, the way that it is with nothing on here, it should be able to just stay in the smallest chain ring without falling off. So to get that low limiter screw set right, all you've really got to do is just take your bike for a little bit of a test ride and just try the screw in different positions and see, how your bike behaves within the different positions. Basically, the way you want to set it is so that when it's in that small chain ring and you're riding, that your derailleur is going to be, perfectly centered on the chain, so that it's not rubbing on either side of it. If it's rubbing on, this rail here is rubbing on it, then it's a good chance that it's going to pull it off, and your chain's going to come off. And if you find that it's rubbing on this rail, then what that means is that your derailleur is not going, far enough in that direction. And even when you have a cable on there, it's not going to be able to go, far enough in that direction. And it's always going to be rubbing, basically. So now that I've got that lower limit screw set correctly, I can move on with reconnecting the cable. We will deal with the high limiter screw, but we don't really need to worry about it right now. So before we do anything over here, we want to make sure that we have our derailleur or our shifter so that it's shifted or it's set in the first gear position, so right like this. I don't have that cover back on yet. I'll do that at the end of the job. But there's a little window which is right about here, which will show the 1. If I go, if I shift up, now it's in 2. But that's the 1 position like that. Now another little thing here at the front is this little thing here, which is called the barrel. And what it's designed for, most bikes have these. What they're designed for is you can make small little minor adjustments of the cable. As you saw on the derailleur over there, if you're going to adjust the tension of the cable, what you have to do is you have to undo that joint thing, and you're re-pinching the cable every single time, which is fairly difficult, and it takes a little bit of effort to do that, and it damages your cable. So if you don't want to do that, you can make small little minor adjustments just by twisting this in and out. So what it does is it basically lengthens the amount of cable housing that you have. So virtually you're tightening or loosening the cable. So before I'm going to attach the cable, what I'd like to do is I'd like to set this barrel so that it's in the middle. So I have, so it's basically the very middle of the distance of travel that it has. So I have the option of tightening or loosening it after I have the cable connected. So as you can see, now that I've loosened this thing off, you've got this little plastic thing which is just for gripping onto it, and then you've got these threads here which thread into your shifter here. So I like to set them so it's about halfway through the threads. So I'll just do that now. So now with it like that, I've got about half the amount of threads which are exposed and half the amount of threads which are in there, which will give me lots of mobility in either direction. So now to reconnect this cable, what you want to do is thread the cable so that it's between this little washer here and the little part where the cable connects to the derailleur there, and then you just kind of loop it around, and then on this side you want to be pulling on the cable, so that there's no like slack in here, because you really want it so when it's in position 1, so when your shifter at the front is, when it says number 1, that it's going to be in that very lowest position that we set using that limiter screw there. So the way I'm going to do this, just to pull tightly on here, since I've got all this extra cable out here, I'm just going to wrap the cable around my hand like this, and then just pull on it, and then using my other hand, I'm going to use my socket over here, and I'm going to tighten that nut back on. However, if you don't have as good a grip on it as I do like this, if you're having trouble holding onto it, maybe you don't have quite as long a cable to deal with, then you can just use a pair of pliers, or even better than that, you can use a pair of vice grips just to grip onto that cable and just pull on it. So yeah, I'm just going to do that now. I'm just going to pull on it like this, have lots of tension on it, so this is nice and tight, no like slack in there, and then we're just going to tighten that on like so. And you want to get that fairly tight on there, not so much that it's going to completely, squash your cable, but you also want it tight enough that your cable is not going to slip out of there. So I got that, I think, where I want it. So now I'm just going to take the bike for a little bit of a test ride and see what happens when I use the shifter at the front and I move it into position 2 and position 3. Hopefully it'll be pretty close. to the right amount of shifting from getting to 2 to 3, but if not, we've got that little barrel at the front which we'll do a few little minor adjustments to get it so it's perfect. And I'm not going to cut this end of the cable off quite yet, so I'm just going to wrap it around up here so it's not going to get caught on anything. So from my test, I actually concluded that this cable is a lot tighter than it actually needs to be. When I shifted into position 2, my chain actually came all the way up into the large chain ring here, which is gear number 3. So we're going to want to loosen this cable off so it's in the right position. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put the chain so that it's on that second chain ring, just manually using my hands, getting nice and dirty in the process. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust that front barrel so that it moves in far enough so that this is going to be centered on it. It's not going to be rubbing on either side. So now I've got that barrel set all the way in there, and it looks like that derailleur's pretty well centered when it's in the second chainring position. I'm just going to take it for a little bit of a test ride and see what I think. So after my little test ride, I'm really happy with where this position of this derailleur is. Adjusting that barrel to where it is right now was pretty much perfect. When you're doing a test like that, you want to also try different positions of the back derailleur back there, because when you're shifting between different gears, what tends to happen is your chain is coming at a different angle. So for example, when your chain is in the smallest chain ring back here, it's coming on an angle like this, and there's a higher possibility of the chain rubbing up against this side of your front derailleur. By the same virtue, if it's in the biggest chain ring back here, there's a better chance of it rubbing on the inside of your front derailleur there. So it's a good idea to make sure that you try different positions so you can get this thing set so that when you're doing both extremes, it's not going to be rubbing on either side. So now that I got this thing set properly for the number 2 position from the middle chain ring, I'm going to try it in the number 1 again, and then try it in the number 3 and see if it's set correctly. So unfortunately, when I did my test of the largest chain ring, my derailleur was too far out. It was always rubbing on the inside, no matter what gear I was in at the back, which means that my cable is still too tight. And as I said, I've already adjusted the barrel all the way in, so I don't have any more adjustment there. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to redo this thing here. So I have it now set back in the smallest chain ring here, and as you can see, there's actually lots of slack in my cable up here. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to loosen this thing off and actually put a little bit more slack in here so the cable will be looser. So when I'm trying to shift into my largest chain ring again, I'm not going to have issues with that. So I just do that with my socket again. And then just pull a little bit more cable through than before. Like that. And then tighten it back on again. Unfortunately, getting one of these derailleurs set correctly is a bit of trial and error. So now with it set like that, I'm going to take it for another little test ride. So with a little bit of trial and error in my test ride, I got this thing pretty much set where I want it to go, just by using the barrel up here, just trial and error, just tightening it in a little bit, loosening a little bit, trying all of the different speeds. But I just want to say I really dislike these kind of shifters. Of course, they're very user friendly. They're very good. For someone that's just kind of getting used to a bike, just being able to click it to whatever gear it goes into. But from a mechanic's point of view, they're really a pain to work with because they're just like so touchy. Like the way that they work is when you shift, the cable moves a set amount of distance. But unfortunately, that set amount of distance doesn't always correlate correctly with your derailleur. So there's always error in there. So it seems like, okay, if you get it set so the cable tension's right for when you're in, gear 2 position, when you go to gear 3 position, is a very good chance that it's not going to be, set correctly, and it's not going to be exactly the position where you want it. Personally, I've always preferred the older style that are on older bikes that are just, a simple friction paddle, something like this, where all you've got to do is you just got to, you can swing this thing and put it in any position where you want it. Every time you shift, you can set the cable so that your derailleur is in exactly the right place. So although these systems are like a little bit less intuitive and a little bit harder to get used to, they're very much easier if you're doing the job we're doing right now of replacing the cable, and they're very much easier to maintain and keep them working the way you want them to work. So while I was doing my little test ride of the bike, I did observe a few times that this chain came off of this side. It came off of the large chain ring. So what that means is that my high limiter screw, my H screw, is not tightened enough. So the way you're going to want to be able to go ahead and test that is just take a screwdriver with you and ride, and then just adjust it so it's it's going to be set correctly. You might just find that it'll shift out of. It'll come off just by shifting into it, but if you want to simulate that problem, the way you can do it is just by riding with it in 3 and then pulling on the cable that you have, the cable for the front derailleur, so that's this one here, the middle one, and that's going to pull it out as far as it possibly can go. And you want that farthest out position so that it's in a position where it's not so far out that it's going to pull it off. So basically you want to tighten this screw up to the point where it's not falling off consistently. So now that I've got my high limiter screw set in the correct position, now my shifters shift pretty much correctly the way that they're supposed to. So now I can go and put this cover back on just by tightening those 2 little screws back on. So now your last step here is to cut off this extra bit of cable that you had here on the end. And generally I think it's a good idea to cut it about 2 inches from where it connects to the derailleur there. You don't want it to be too long that it's going to be getting caught, and it's going to be every time your crank goes around it's going to be pressing up against it. But you also want enough distance on there so you can get a pair of pliers in there and grip onto it if you ever need to be making adjustments on it in the future. So to cut it, what I just used is a pair of side cutters that look like this, fairly sharp pair. And the main technique, the main thing to focus on when you're actually cutting it is to just make sure you press, really firmly and really like one solid action. You don't want to, cut partway through it and then, oh, it's not cut, and then you press more. Like you want one solid action to cut through it, because what'll happen otherwise is it won't cut, very evenly, and it'll just start to, fray out in all every different direction already. So what I'm going to do is just put the side cutters on there like that, and then I'm just all of a sudden just going to push really firmly on it, and hopefully it'll just clip right off. So let's give that a go, just like that. So you can already see that the end there is starting to come undone a little bit. If I just left it there, over time it would start to fray, and it might unravel itself all the way back to where it connects, which would not be a very good thing. You have a few different options for protecting that. The way that the bicycle shops do it, and when they manufacture the bikes, they use those special little aluminum cable end things where just the sleeve would just slips over top of there, and then you use a pair of pliers and you just basically just crimp it on there. So if you wanted to, you could go to a bike shop and you could buy those. They're fairly expensive for what they are. They may be like 25 cents they'll charge you for every single one of those. I guess you could buy it in a bigger pack, but realistically, how many times are you going to actually be using these things? So that's one option. Another option, I've heard like lots of different suggestions. You can use solder. You can solder the end. Just put a little drip of solder there. Just using a soldering gun, and that'll do it. But I'm outside right now. I don't have an outlet close by. I don't want to wait for my soldering iron to get heated up, so I'm not going to do that option. An interesting one I read somewhere online. Someone said they used like the nipples from like an old wheel. And they're basically just a sleeve, a metal sleeve, from your wheel, and they just put those over top of there, and they just use them the same way as the cable end and crimp those on there. That's another option. But the option that I'm going to use today is just to use a little strip of duct tape and just ravel it around there a few times to keep it from unraveling. All right, so all you need to do is just a strip of regular everyday duct tape, and just rip it off a little bit, and then we're going to cut about a 1 centimeter strip out of this, something like that. Doesn't need to be that long, maybe about 2 inches or so. And then I'm just going to put that duct tape on here. Now you'll notice that when they coil these fibers together, they coil them in a certain direction, and you want to be wrapping your duct tape in the same direction as that, so that the adhesive's not going to pull it and start to unravel it. So I'm just going to put that on here. Well, there we go, and once we got it wrapped around, just squeeze it a little bit and make sure that all that adhesive in the duct tape sticks properly. And something else you can do to make sure it stays there a little bit better is you can use a lighter and you can melt the duct tape a little bit, and it'll help it shrink a little bit around that cable so it's not going to fall off. So this concludes my tutorial showing how to change the front derailleur cable on a bicycle. I hope you found this video helpful and interesting. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.